Hey guys, Moose here. Welcome back to another episode of Stonehearth in our Rayya's Children playthrough, and it is March 14th, Pi Day. So happy Pi Day. If you don't know, that's 3.14, which is the mathematical constant. Is it a constant? Let's call it a constant pi, which is relevant for a lot of different calculations, primarily having to do with circles, I believe, if I'm remembering my math correctly. That's pretty cool. But 3.14, 314, pretty much what you'd expect. Anyway, happy Pi Day. It is... what is today? Tuesday, right. Sorry. Obviously I record these ahead of time since I go up at 6 in the morning, so yeah. Don't always recall what the actual date is. But yeah, 314, Tuesday. And today it's really weird. There's some weird... I already know what I'm going to talk about, but I'll just go through some of the other ones. There's apparently a game called Yoshi Touch and Go that came out on this date in 2005, which was 12 years ago. It's a very dark name. Touch and Go is usually like something you expect to hear a doctor say about someone who's in critical condition. It's like they could die, but we don't know yet. So naming like a Yoshi title after that, which is presumably for children, is like really kind of weird. I don't know. It was interesting to see that pop up on the list anyway. Daily update, we do not get anyone new, that's fine. Let's see, do we have anything that we care about making? Not particularly. But there's another one that was actually, it's an announcement. It's not a release, and it's not a game either. But it has to do with games. And that is on this date in... what year was that? 2007, so 10 years ago. 10-year birthday, I guess, of the announcement of it, which is horrible, but well, you'll see why when I say it's the Games for Windows Live service, which, if you've ever had the displeasure of dealing with it, is completely fucking terrible in every way. That's 20 of them. It actually was one of the major reasons, in my opinion, that like I've repeatedly gone back to play Dark Souls. And one of the main reasons why I've never really gotten into it to a serious degree ever since I first played it was because it had Games for Windows Live attached to it, which was just a horrible shit show of a DRM system. And really, it offers no benefit whatsoever to the consumer from my perspective. You could argue that it's like it ties into the Xbox stuff, but I mean, personally, I've never had an Xbox or wanted to have an Xbox, so it was completely useless for me. And then on top of that, having it be something that inhibits my ability to actually play the game, it's just like, this is worthless. And I feel like we're seeing more and more situations like this lately, where there's something in a game or an OS or anything like that, and it's added in, and theoretically you could argue, oh, well, it lets you keep all your data in one place. It lets you blah, 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 whatever. Minor benefit. Something like the Windows 10 stuff that spies on you. Something like that, where it's like, okay, yeah, but that's not really a benefit. You see, that doesn't actually really help me. I would really rather not have it. I think Google already has all that covered, so I don't really need my OS to spy on me when I'm not really looking to search for anything. And their rationale was like, oh, it'll help you search for stuff or something like that, which is a terrible rationale. And then they also made it borderline impossible to disable. I mean, that's not completely true, but that plus the Windows 10 upgrade thing where they're like, or almost forcing you to get it even if you don't want it, to the point that they've been sued for it and had to pay a significant price for forcing people to update like that. Things like that are becoming more and more common, where it's like people, they add this feature to their product, but it's not a feature. It doesn't help the consumer in any way. It only benefits, you know, Microsoft or whoever. So Games for Windows Live, obviously, I talked about this in Windows 10, so we're talking about Microsoft here. So is it all Microsoft? No, it's not all Microsoft. It's a lot of companies do this. Uplay is another example. Origin. Origin's at least better. They, like, the only reason that, from a consumer's perspective, that I would want something like Origin is because it has its own sales. I would still rather they just put the games on Steam, personally. But they don't want to do that because it's in their interest not to. So that's what we wind up getting. And there's been a lot more situations like that, I feel, in the last decade or so, where decisions are being made not because it's a good product or something that the customer would want or need. They're being made because it benefits the person putting out the product, basically. So it benefits the company, not the individual. And it's frustrating. But we're doing that more and more these days, it seems. And, you know, every new, that's not right, there we go. Every time we get a new launcher, you know, Twitch has its own. I'm not really a fan of that. No, no, 5K. A little under 5K off. Thought we were closer than that. Twitch has its own Uplay, Origin, Steam, GOG. There's too many fucking launchers. No games out there launch from their own thing anymore. Even Minecraft has a fucking launcher of its own. It's just... I'm sure you guys are all sick of it too. I don't think I'm like stumbling on something new and interesting here. I'm not under any illusion about that. But it seems like it's not just launchers. We seem to be moving in that direction more and more and more as time goes on. We're getting more products that benefit the creator much more than they do the customer, and it's frustrating as a customer, and I'm sure you guys generally feel the same way, because really all you want is to play your fucking game. But instead everything's getting wrapped up with like basically DRM. Really, that's what it boils down to. Whether it's a SimCity situation that we discussed in a previous episode, where you're getting games that launch and they're unplayable because there's DRM that you have to have online, and it got taken offline because they expected less players for the first week, which is a serious problem that these games always have, because if you've never thought about this, typically for a game's player base, it peaks pretty much right at release. You get the most people playing right when it comes out. And then consistently over time after that, it's a very distinct downward trend, usually pretty sharply right at the start, and then it levels out. So this is something that we experienced with Final Fantasy XIV when it first got relaunched. A lot of people were complaining like, hey, with the game the servers aren't stable, it takes me forever to get in, and all these problems. But if you put yourself in the company's shoes, you're thinking about it, you'd say, alright, well, how are we going to manage this? How are we going to do a launch for a game? Are we supposed to put in, like, you know, all this money into a temporary server? Like, there is no temporary server. That's not how servers work. If you get a server, I mean, yeah, to a degree you can contract it out and say, hey, Amazon, I need, in the short term, I need 10 extra servers, and then we'll let go of them after a while, and you have them back to sell to someone else. Cloud hosting stuff, maybe you could do that to a degree, but generally you don't. You plan for kind of a baseline player base for any game that has its own servers, and you're gonna have stress, especially you see in MMOs right when they come out. Now, it doesn't happen much with MMOs because they don't come out that often, but it absolutely happens. So now if you take that logic, that same thought process, and apply it to DRM and say, okay, well, how are you gonna make DRM work? And particularly in the situation of SimCity coming out and being a total shit show because no one can play it because of the always online DRM crap. How do you handle that? How do you deal with it and make it work somehow that both parties get what they need? If you say that, okay, fine, they need DRM. And I think the only way that you can make it work is that initially any significant game at this point, if you're a major developer, if you're a AAA publisher, and you have some kind of a scheme like that where you want to have always online DRM, you necessarily have to, absolutely have to, early on say, okay, we're going to have this, the feature is going to be built in, it will exist, but it's going to be turned off for the first month. And then after a month, we're going to turn it on, and if anyone has a pirated version, then they're out. But you can't have it running for the first month because it just will not work. Because you're punishing actual customers at that point. And I think it's probably fine to have that always online DRM to a degree, as long as it's only after it's been released, after the game's been released. And I know I would really rather just not have online only, you know, always online DRM to begin with. I would love to kill it and get rid of it completely. And you know what? Steam is that to a degree. So let's not forget that Steam is absolutely a form of DRM. But it's a relatively unobtrusive form of DRM that also offers other benefits, such as being able to download all your games anytime you want. And also make purchases that are very, very, very cost effective from an entertainment standpoint, where you can get, you know, a really good game on sale for almost nothing. And that's not something that you had before, and I think Steam is fine as it is because of that. They manage things properly. They don't go crazy demanding all these benefits. It's the same thing I was talking about before. Things that benefit the company but not the consumer. Steam walks that line well. Yes, they have things that only benefit the company. And the fact that it's basically DRM is one of those. The fact that they're not actually selling any actual product. Really, they're selling bandwidth more than anything. Yes, the game, they're selling software too, but they're not really. They're selling... It's one of those situations where it's kind of fuzzy who actually owns it. I think if you buy a game on Steam, you don't actually... And this isn't unique to Steam. I think this is true of any medium in which you buy a game these days. If you buy a game, you're not buying a game. You're buying a contract to use that game until the person who sold it to you decides that you're not allowed to use it anymore. And that could be usually used to, you know, basically think of it this way. If you say that, hey, I'm selling you this game, I'm a developer and you're buying the game from me, you buy it, and then you cheat online and I ban you, and I say, well, you're not allowed to play online anymore, but you own the game. Do I have the right to ban you? Do I have the right to say, well, no, you can't play anymore because you cheated? I'm not necessarily sure that you do. You could say, well, okay, the participation in the public server, whatever. That's a factor, and there's a lot of detail, but you have to kind of consider that unlawful act, or not unlawful, cheating isn't illegal exactly. It's not that simple, but you know, there's a little bit of gray weirdness there, whether or not you actually own something that you buy. And some of that is necessary to deal with situations like having a cheater or something, but some of it is much more shitty than that. And that can be like, well, hey, I've got a Steam account that I've had for like 10 years almost, or more now. I don't even remember. It's extremely old. I was playing Half-Life 1 on it that I have on a disc. I still have the disc. And I was playing Day of Defeat, Natural Selection, all kinds of stuff. Way, way back in the day. It's a very old account. I've put thousands of dollars into this account. There's games on here that I've spent a lot of money on. I have a lot of games. And it's not just, oh, hey, he's a YouTuber. He gets a lot of keys for free because people want to play his game. No one's given me a free key for anything. Ever. Yet. Tried to get one once for Northgard and they didn't reply, which is understandable. I'm nobody. Why would they give me a key? But the point is, what happens to that money if Steam decides that I don't get to have it anymore? Do they pay me? No. Do I get the games? No, they're gone. Those keys are deactivated. Or my account is no longer accessible and the keys can't be used elsewhere. So now it's gone. I don't have an account anymore. I don't have access to any of those games. Is that legal? And that's a big question. It depends who owns what, basically. And this is not something that's unique to gaming. It's definitely a major factor in gaming because it allows these companies to do kind of what they want with you. And Games for Windows Live is a little bit of a different animal. Usually you're not launching. It's not really a launcher. It was just sort of like a more traditional DRM that you had to log into their bullshit service to play the game at all, which It's terrible. I absolutely, in case it wasn't clear, I hated that service. Like I said, it stopped me from playing Dark Souls many, many times. Oh, we're actually making pretty good progress here. It's about 1,000 there, not bad. Probably keep expanding up here. But yeah, it's a terrible, terrible service that offers no benefit to the consumer. But Steam does, but it still puts the consumer in a weird spot of like, all right, well, what are you going to do if they decide you don't get to play anymore? How are you going to handle that? I think that's a real meaningful question, because I don't really have an answer for it. What would I do if Steam took away my account and said you can't play Steam games anymore? Well, I'd have to make another account, but what about all that money I spent, all these games that I have? What would I do? And I don't know that there's anything I could do. Basically just trusting them not to do it. And that's a really shitty position to be in. And this is kind of the argument that people make in favor of, you know, getting physical copies to their games. Because then it's not, you can't get it taken away from you necessarily. And you still can. No food, bullshit, you guys have so much food. So it's a difficult situation. And another example of when this is done is a lot of tractor, you know, this is going to sound weird, but like the companies that make tractors and industrial equipment for farms will not let you do work on your own vehicle. Because they're like, oh, well, you're not buying the vehicle, you're leasing it basically. Even if it's not actually a lease, you're renting it. Except it's a one-time payment. And they will brick, as I understand it, they will brick your vehicle if you do not pay them to do the maintenance on it and pay them to do service or any upgrades or changes. They won't let you fuck with it at all, which is really unfortunate in my opinion, because the ability to mess with things, I mean, this is how I learned computers, was to mess with stuff and figure out how it worked by messing with it. Now, I still remember back in the day, I would always be frustrated and fail to turn on my computer because there'd be a floppy disk in it. And like that entire thing, if you don't know, basically in the old days, if you had a floppy drive, generally the computer would always try to boot from the floppy drive first, and it wouldn't fail over to the normal OS after that. That would be installed on a hard drive. So what would happen is you'd put in a normal, like for a game or something, a floppy disk like SimAnt or whatever, it'd be in there, and you'd try to boot up, and it would say, hey, you can't boot off this, what are you doing? And it doesn't say, cannot boot off the floppy. It says something far more ambiguous than that. So you get in this weird little situation of like, well, I don't actually understand what's going wrong, because the error message is non-descriptive, which, if you're getting into programming, very big thing to remember, make your error messages good. I work with a lot of people who are doing tech work for my company, and they do not make good error messages, and it results in testing of their new systems taking forever because we have no fucking clue what's going wrong, and neither do they. They don't even know. So it creates this really shitty situation for everyone. Always, always make your error codes detailed, or at least specific. Don't use the same error code twice. Put a number in it so that you can find where to go no matter what it is, and you can figure out where in your code it broke. Anyway, point is, there was no ability to say boot from this or boot for that, as far as I knew. You just basically, it defaulted to floppy, and if you couldn't boot from the floppy, it would, you know, just break, basically, and refuse to do anything. You'd have to reboot, or you reboot, take it out, and then it would boot off the hard drive as normal. But if you failed to do that, you didn't know what you were doing, then nothing works. And that's how I learned about computers is, you know, my computer's not working, what the fuck? So having the ability to mess with things and learn by messing up is really important, especially for a young person. So, you know, that's why I'm a big proponent of Windows computers or PCs or even Linux over Macs, because Macs in general, Apple kind of lives off of a more restricted environment, which I don't really like. I think, you know, if you do color by numbers all of your life, you're never going to learn how to actually draw anything, right? That's kind of the analogy that I go for. If you are using something that lets you make mistakes and lets you break it and lets you learn from that, you're going to get better, generally, unless you're an idiot, and there's plenty of those, but that's a whole different conversation. So yeah, I don't know, I want things to be open and available, and systems like Games for Windows Live kind of hamper that, I guess. And I kind of got on a tangent there, it's a little bit unrelated, but the point that I'm trying to make is that I'm really starting to get tired and frustrated of seeing all these products with air quotes, and you can't see that I'm doing them, that really predominantly only really benefit the company that created them rather than the consumers that are buying them. And I feel like that hurts us all in the long run. And you could say in the case of Games for Windows Live, it was particularly shitty, and that's why everyone hated it, and that's absolutely true. But we need to fight against even the ones that are not as shitty. And in that respect, you know, Steam really is a bad thing. Long term. We need competitors to Steam, kind of. But more than that, we need kind of an agnostic system that doesn't have control over any of it. What I'd really like, more than anything, is that you could order a game off Amazon, have the disc shipped to you, but before it gets to you, like right when you buy it, have them send you a code, but then you still get the disc. That would be ideal to me. But I understand that doing that doesn't really make sense for them, because they'd rather just get rid of the whole manufacturing side of it, of making a box and making all the inserts and bullshit and print, you know, burning the disc doesn't make sense for them to do. It's an extra cost, so they don't want to do that. But at the same time, as a consumer, these are things that we really benefit from. So having control over your media, having control over your purchases is something that we're lacking, getting less and less of every day. I mean, hell, we had the CIA leaks recently where, you know, they can get in your phone, no problem. That's not okay. Personal freedom, and, you know, certain parties tend to stand for this and say, you know, actually, well, both of them do, say, oh, you should have personal freedom, yeah, right up until it benefits us to not have that. And it's frustrating to see the world going in that direction. Because as much as you say, well, the US isn't the world, we kind of dictate what gets done as far as tech goes, so... Anyway, that wound up being kind of a rant and much larger picture than I intended it to be, but I don't know, I think it's an interesting subject. If you have any thoughts on the matter, feel free to let me know in the comments. I'm definitely interested in hearing about it. This is one of the topics out there that's just a lot of fun to consider, think about, discuss, so let me know. Anyway, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope you'll join us the next one as well. Take care.